There is something fascinating about the future that never arrived. The chrome cities, the flying cars, the robot butlers serving breakfast while families prepared for their commute to the moon. If you grew up in the 1980s, you remember exactly what tomorrow was supposed to look like. And it looked nothing like today. This was a decade obsessed with what was coming next. The space shuttle was flying. Personal computers were appearing in homes. Synthesizers were creating sounds that felt like transmissions from another century. The future was not some distant abstraction. It felt close enough to touch. This was the decade that gave us Back to the Future, Blade Runner, and countless magazine articles predicting life in the year 2000. Technology was accelerating, and everyone had opinions about where it was heading. Some predictions were remarkably accurate. Most were wonderfully, spectacularly wrong. Let us walk through how people in the 1980s actually imagined the future they thought was coming. Some of this might trigger memories of promises made. Some of it reveals how impossible it is to predict where humanity is heading. Let us step into that vision. The future imagined in the 1980s was supposed to be shiny. Everything chrome and glass and smooth curves. Cities would have buildings connected by enclosed skywalks and transportation tubes. Monorails would glide silently between towers. The aesthetic came from a particular optimism about technology solving every problem. Pollution would be eliminated by clean energy. Disease would be conquered by miracle drugs. Work would become optional as robots handled the tedious tasks. This vision appeared everywhere, in movies, in advertisements, in the Sunday supplement articles that predicted life in 2010 or 2020. The future was always clean, always efficient, always better. Flying cars were perhaps the most persistent prediction. Every decade since the 1950s had promised them, but the 1980s seemed certain they were finally coming. Popular Mechanics ran articles about personal aircraft. Back to the Future Part 2 showed flying DeLoreans as standard transportation by 2015. The assumption was that technology would simply continue advancing in obvious directions. Cars existed, planes existed, and combining them seemed inevitable. Nobody considered the practical problems: air traffic control for millions of personal aircraft, the training required, the fuel costs, the crashes. The dream of flying cars revealed something about 1980s futurism. It assumed technology would solve problems without creating new ones. Robots were supposed to be everywhere by now. Not the industrial robots that actually emerged, but humanoid robots. Metal servants that would cook meals, clean houses, and perhaps become companions. The Jetsons had Rosie. Lost in Space had the robot. The 1980s imagined these fictional helpers becoming reality within decades. Robot toys were hugely popular. Transformers, GoBots, and countless others filled store shelves. Children grew up expecting their adult lives would include robot assistants. The technology seemed to be advancing. Simple robots appeared in factories. Surely household versions were next. The prediction missed how difficult it is to create machines that can navigate unpredictable home environments, handle delicate objects, and understand human needs. Space was where the 1980s placed its biggest bets on the future. The Space Shuttle program launched in 1981, and it seemed to promise routine access to orbit. Space stations would follow, then moon bases, then Mars colonies. By 2020, tourism to orbit would be common. Families might vacation on the moon. The optimism was genuine and widespread. NASA produced artwork showing sprawling lunar settlements with domed habitats and mining operations. Science magazines featured covers depicting everyday life in space. Children learned about careers that would exist in orbital factories and asteroid mining operations. Before we continue exploring the technological dreams and cultural predictions of the era, if you are enjoying this look back at how people imagined tomorrow and want to explore more stories about how different decades saw themselves and their futures, consider subscribing. There are so many more stories about American optimism, innovation, and the dreams that shape generations. Video communication was another certainty. The telephone would obviously evolve to include pictures. AT&T had demonstrated video phones at World's Fairs for decades. By the 1980s, the technology existed. It was simply a matter of making it affordable and widespread. Every futuristic movie showed characters communicating face-to-face across vast distances. Video calls seemed as inevitable as color television had once seemed. This prediction actually came true, though not in the way anyone expected. The video phones imagined in the 1980s were dedicated devices, large screens built into walls or sitting on desks. No one predicted that video calling would arrive through pocket computers that also played music, took photographs, and connected to a global information network. The home of the future was supposed to be automated and intelligent. Lights would turn on when you entered rooms. Climate control would adjust to your preferences automatically. Appliances would communicate with each other. The refrigerator would know when you were running low on milk and add it to a shopping list. Some of this has actually arrived, though decades later than predicted, and in forms nobody quite imagined. The 1980s version involved central computer systems with chunky interfaces. The reality involves voice assistants and smartphone apps. The destination was roughly correct. The path there was completely different. Television and movies shaped how people imagined the future. Blade Runner in 1982 presented a darker vision. It showed overcrowded cities, environmental decay, and corporations more powerful than governments. It was a minority view at the time, but it proved more accurate than the gleaming optimism of most predictions. The Terminator suggested artificial intelligence might become dangerous. These warnings existed alongside the cheerful predictions, but they were entertainment, not serious forecasts. Back to the Future. Part 2 deserves special attention. Released in 1989 but set in 2015, it became a cultural touchstone for predictions from the 1980s. The movie showed hoverboards, self-lacing shoes, and holographic movie advertisements. Flying cars filled the skies. Fax machines were everywhere, which seemed plausible in 1989 but became amusingly dated. When actual 2015 arrived, people compared reality to the movie's predictions. The film got some things surprisingly right. Video calling, wearable technology, and widespread screens matched reality reasonably well, but hoverboards remained fictional despite the movie's confidence. Magazines and newspapers ran countless articles about life in the year 2000. That date had symbolic power. The millennium seemed like a natural turning point where everything would change. Predictions included 4-day work weeks as automation increased productivity, paperless offices as computers replaced filing cabinets, cures for cancer and heart disease, extended lifespans reaching 100 or beyond, cities enclosed in climate-controlled domes, and underwater habitats for expanding populations. The predictions shared a common assumption: technology would continue advancing rapidly in directions that were already visible. What nobody predicted was the internet, at least not in its actual form. Computer networks existed. Bulletin boards and early online services were emerging. But the idea of a global network that would reshape commerce, communication, politics, and daily life was largely absent from mainstream predictions. The future everyone imagined was built on technologies they could already see. The future that actually arrived was built on technologies that did not yet exist. Consumer products promised the future was arriving now. Electronic devices had sleek designs, lots of buttons, and bright digital displays. There were calculators that talked, watches that stored phone numbers, and portable cassette players that let you carry music anywhere. These products felt like stepping stones to the amazing gadgets surely coming soon. Stores had entire sections dedicated to electronics, and browsing them felt like previewing tomorrow. What the 1980s got fundamentally right was that technology would transform daily life. What it got wrong was how. Predictions assumed the future would look different: shinier buildings, flying vehicles, robots walking around. The actual future looked surprisingly similar to the past, but it worked completely differently. Smartphones transformed everything while fitting in pockets. The internet reshaped society while remaining largely invisible. Social media changed how humans interact without requiring any physical change to the world. The 1980s vision of the future revealed what that decade valued and feared. The emphasis on convenience and automation reflected a society tired of household drudgery. Space dreams reflected Cold War competition and the sense that humanity should keep expanding. The gleaming cities reflected optimism that problems had solutions. Darker visions in some films reflected anxieties about corporate power and environmental damage. For those who grew up in the 1980s, the future was a place of promise and wonder. It was always just around the corner, always about to arrive. The flying cars never came. The moon colonies remain unbuilt. Robot servants exist mainly as vacuum cleaners and voice assistants, but the future did arrive. It just refused to match the predictions. For those who remember waiting for tomorrow, of imagining what 2020 would bring, there is something both amusing and poignant about seeing what actually happened. The future is always stranger than anyone imagines, and there is always more history to explore.